Before I tell you about my one prayer, I want to share something about myself that's significant in regards to this. I might just move that up a little bit. Think of the most annoying teenage kid you could ever possibly think of. Don't say their name because they might be sitting right next to you. But think of the most annoying teenage kid you can think about. If you have a picture in your mind of that person or of what that type of person is, multiply that by about 100, and you get me at about year 8 or so. I probably wasn't the easiest guy to be around and might be slightly easier and less annoying today, but I share that with you for a key reason, because in that situation, in that reality, somebody believed in me. I grew up in a church and was baptized at about age 11, age 12, somewhere around there. But in school, I struggled in many ways socially. I drifted away from church and just wandered through life, somewhat lonely and somewhat disengaged with everything except maybe video games and watching sports on TV. But around year 8, God somehow pulled me back into church. Somehow subconsciously I realized that I needed to be around church more to get a sense of fulfillment in life and to realize God's love. After hanging out at church again for a while, the youth group leader at my church, his name was Paul Cavanaugh, and he had a couple guys that were helping out with youth group, a couple 20-something guys, and they were a great group of guys. And I've told this story about Paul a couple times before, but probably not enough. He saw something in me that nobody else saw. Most people at that time looked at me and said, well, he's not really a leader type. He's not the type of person that we can invest in for the future of the church or to help in church. He's a bit socially awkward, and his behavior doesn't seem to fit the leadership mold. But for some reason, Paul saw something in me and gave me an opportunity. The pastor of the old church that I grew up in Chicago referred to this as taking a risk on a leader. I didn't seem to be a leader, but Paul took a risk on me and invited me to lead a small group of high school kids about my age. He said, I'm going to take a risk on this young man, and asked me to lead in that setting. And what we all discovered, through God, of course, is that God had given me, this young person, a particular set of skills that seemed to be hidden dormant, that nobody really understood at the time. And He's brought these gifts up to me in the surface, and it gave me a chance. And what happened in the end, as many people from my hometown talk about, is it helped me to launch over 14 small groups that constantly were reproducing and created new opportunities for high school kids to engage with God. And going forward, it launched me into church ministry, and ultimately, it's the reason I'm standing here before you today. I'm forever indebted to Paul Cavanaugh because his faith in me and the risk he took in me has given me incredible influence for God's kingdom. See, my one prayer for the church is to see young people empowered in leadership. My prayer is for that the young people here, both who have obvious and immense talents like music, working with kids, or even technology, but also those whose talents and passions aren't as obvious, to see you guys empowered in leadership and influence in the church. And for some of you who are here listening, you need to hear this. You need to hear the phrase that I heard years ago, I believe in you. God has wired you in a unique way, and you have a huge amount to contribute, both to the church and to God's kingdom at large. As I help us to reflect on young people today, think about how you would answer this question, whether you're a parent, whether you've been a parent in the past, or whether you're observing parenting with relatives or cousins or things like that. Think about how you would answer this question. How do you define success for raising the next generation? Fast forward maybe 5 years to 15 or 20 years in your mind, how would you define success? See, I propose to you that our culture might define success, the general culture, this way. It might say that you want to raise well-rounded, well-educated, happy kids. How many of you would say that? That culture would basically say you want to raise well-rounded, well-educated, happy happy kids that get what they, not that get what they want, but happiness is the objective. And when culture says that, I think what it's saying is that get a good education, get a good job so you can have a nice house and a better life than whatever we had. This is sort of the generational thing that people think about the people going forward. But Jesus reflects on this in a little bit of a different way. And in Matthew 16:26, he says, "What good will it be for a man who gains the whole world?" You could say well-rounded, well-educated, happy people, but yet forfeits his soul. And I would say that while happiness, good education, good job are very, very important things for us to attribute to the younger generation, I would say that one of the most important things that we as parents and we as models of the next generation can do is to impart spiritual life and vitality to the next generation. Because if they have just more than what we had, but don't have a relationship with Christ, aren't connected with God, it might not amount to much anything. It might end up being somewhat like I was in year 8, just wandering around, no purpose, just going from next step to next step. I would say that we're not called just to raise well-rounded, well-educated, happy kids. We're called to unleash single-minded, Christ-centered, biblically anchored world changers for the glory of God. We're called not just to protect them but keep them safe, but to unleash them into a movement of Christian faith that, as we heard from people earlier today, manifests itself in a variety of different ways, but gives us the chance to engage with God and make a difference in the world. And whether you're a parent or not, the calling that God has given to all of us is to invest in the next generation. Now, I've been in a variety of different church contexts, and sometimes in the church, there's this unspoken or possibly even spoken animosity between the younger generation and the older generation. I can't speak much to the church environment here at the Billabong, but I can say for many churches in the area and for the church at large, we must make it a key objective to get the younger generation involved at key influence levels and even key decision-making points at all levels of the church. If you look at the Bible, there are many places that actually talk about this generational influence, this investing in the next generation. In the Old Testament, we hear a story about the ramifications of not investing in the next generation. If any of you are familiar with the story of Moses, you'll know that God gave him a vision of entering the Promised Land. And towards the end of his life, he could see the Promised Land, but he couldn't go in it. He didn't get to go in it himself. But luckily, one of Moses' best gifts was he mentored the next generation with a strong faith. He rose up a man named Joshua, and when Moses died, he handed off the leadership to Joshua. And there was somehow a seamless transition, which, as we know, isn't always the case in leadership. Everything seemed to go along relatively smoothly, particularly for Old Testament times. And Joshua got to do what Moses always wanted to do. He led the Israelites into the Promised Land. Now, Joshua was quite a phenomenal leader in and amongst himself, but he had a downside. And Joshua didn't raise the next generation of leaders. And in the beginning of Judges, there's this tragedy that we see that happens. It tells us that after Joshua died and his generation died, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord or knew anything about what God did for Israel. In one generation, they forgot about the remarkable things that God did for them. And because of Joshua's glaring weakness, the descendants who came after him started to begin this cycle of ups and downs. And you read stuff in Judges, everything leading up to the kings of Israel, there's this cycle where at times people didn't invest in the next generation, and everyone looked around and all of a sudden people forgot who God was. There's significant ramifications if we don't invest in the next generation. Now let's contrast this with another pair of leaders in the New Testament. If Moses is one of the key leaders in the Old Testament, then Paul is one of the key leaders in the New Testament. And Paul did have a gift of empowering the next generation. And the most obvious example among many is a man named Timothy. And we can look through various verses, not in one particular place, but reading through the letters of Paul. We can see some of the things that Paul said to Timothy to invest in him. He said to Timothy, "Don't be afraid. God did not give you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love and a sound mind." He also said to Timothy, "I'm going to lay hands on you, and when I do, I'm going to pray a prayer of faith, and the Holy Spirit is going to stir up gifts in you." You hear him in many times saying to Timothy, there is more in you. There is more in you. And Paul also said to Timothy, a very, very phrase dear to my heart, said, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young." Paul invested in Timothy. He didn't stop at what God gifted him for himself. He transferred his gifts and his passions and his unique faith and works of God to Timothy. And we know that Timothy did some remarkable things for God as well. You see, there's impact that's being passed down to the generations. So if you're here and you're part of the younger generation, it's the same words that Paul uttered to Timothy years ago. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, because I believe in you and God believes in you. And for the rest of you, here's what you need to do. You need to find a young person around here or someone that you're connected with. And I'd say you almost need to grab them by the shoulders and say, I believe in you. That young person may not look the part. You may not know exactly what impact they'll have on the future, but they need you and they need your support. The younger generation needs to understand that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. We are indebted to those who have gone before us because the foundation of faith, of life, of impact has been laid by those who have gone before us. The younger generation needs the older generation to believe in them and to empower them for future leadership of the church and even in other areas of life. And the older generation needs the younger generation if it wants its labors, its work to live on and be fruitful in the future. Both the older generation and the younger generation have a role to play in not only the church's future, but in the church today. And the generations need to work together, and it must be intentional. This stuff doesn't happen by accident, by chance. And so reflecting back on the story of Paul and Timothy, a reflection I want to give to everyone in this room is to ask this question of yourself and reflect on it yourself, regardless of age. Who is your Paul and who is your Timothy? Do you have a Paul in your life, someone that you can learn from, someone who can speak into your life, someone who you can ask questions of? And for the person who are looking for that Paul, when you find that person, I think this is a key thing that we all need to understand, particularly younger people. Don't copy what they do. Learn how they think. Ask them, what are you reading? What are you learning? What would you do in this situation? What advice would you give yourself if you were in my situation? What are the things that I don't see? What are my weak spots? What are my blind spots? Where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? Ask questions and learn. The mentors that I have in my past, I didn't do things exactly the way they did them, but I learned how they did it, why they did it, and it made me the man that I am today. And for all of you, even the younger people, who is your Timothy? Who is the person that you can open yourself up to? Who's the person that you can share the story about your life? Who can you offer prayer to and your time? It's not just someone who you think needs help. It's someone who you can find to say, I believe in you. The odds are, from what we see in Scripture, Timothy didn't just go looking for Paul. Paul found Timothy. My mentor, Paul Cavanaugh, is not someone who I went looking for and said, teach me or call me out, give me an opportunity. Paul noticed me, and he reached into my life. And the unfortunate reality for some of this room that you might need to hear is that the more mature in faith have the responsibility to be the first one to step into a relationship with the ones who are less mature in faith. So who is your Timothy? And who is your Paul? This could even be about people outside the church. I don't always want things to be about what's happening inside the church, even though I spend most of my time in church. Who are the younger people or the older people in your work or social settings where you see someone either in faith or even in that industry? Who are the people that you can invest in? Who are the Timothys that you can just share life with, share a story with? And sometimes, who are the people that need to hear, I believe in you? And you don't just tell these people what to do. You spend time with them and you care for them. No matter what age you are, no matter what circumstance you are, I propose to you that everyone needs a Paul and everyone needs a Timothy. Someone who speaks into your life and someone whose life you can speak into. This is my prayer for the church, that we would all be seeking out ways to invest in those around us, and that we would follow the biblical pattern of empowering the next generation. I'd like to close with this psalm, and I hope that it'll be your prayer, the prayer that you think about, the prayer that you reflect on. It's from Psalm 71, 17 to 18, and there's really power in this psalm. There's power in what this has. You can almost feel the emotion, I think, of the psalmist here, and I want to read this to you. It says, "Since my youth, God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come." I want to read that again. I know I didn't put the words up there for you, but I want to read this again. It says, "Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come." I believe that one of the greatest callings we have as Christians is to impart spiritual life to the next generation. And my prayer for this church and for the church at large is that hopefully not just some of us will be doing this, but that all of us will be doing it.